Hi everyone, it's Emily, and today I wanted to share a full review of Atelier Ryza 3, The Alchemist of the End and the Secret Key. In this review, I'll try to accommodate those who are already familiar with the franchise, especially the Ryza games, as well as newcomers who are looking at Ryza 3 as a potential entry point into this franchise. Before we start, I want to first thank Koei Tecmo for sending an early access code my way. This is my first review code, so that's very exciting for me. I also want to say that so far I've logged in 65 hours of the Switch version of this game, and I've completed the main story, but there's still a ton of content available that I haven't done yet. Atelier Ryza 3 is the final entry in the Atelier Ryza and or the Atelier Secret trilogy, and it really just showcases how much the Atelier series has grown over the years. Like with the previous entries in the Secret trilogy, you follow Ryza and her group of friends around the world on a quest to discover answers for certain secrets and use alchemy to help those you meet along the way. This third entry introduces a new secret involving mysterious islands that are popping up and disrupting Ryza's hometown's trade routes, along with these secret keys that are mysteriously appearing in Ryza and manifesting themselves in her alchemy. Now, this is the most ambitious cast of characters we've had in the Atelier game so far. There are 11 members total that you could play as, which is honestly pretty overwhelming. I found myself just kind of sticking to my 5 core party members and not really rotating too many other players in and out. I just found it easier because everyone has their own kind of abilities and party dynamics. But I do want to go back and experiment at least with the 3 new party members that were introduced in this entry. But outside of the large and lovable cast, I think the biggest highlight for this game was definitely the exploration and just how ambitious Gust went with this third and final entry. This is the first game that Gust experimented with a semi-open world environment, and it's very reminiscent actually of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, especially with all the different diverse areas and landscapes that you could just kind of explore at your heart's content. If you played the other Ryza games, there are a lot of familiar areas that you could go back and explore in, but there are a lot of brand new environments that I had a lot of fun exploring in, and just seeing how vibrant the world was. Now, I was playing on the Nintendo Switch in handheld mode, so there are certain limitations, I'm sure, with this device compared to this PlayStation console. And I'm sure it looks beautiful on the PS5, but I actually really enjoyed playing this in handheld mode on the Switch. The only downside to this was, of course, the small text, which is becoming, I think, more of a problem, especially if you play on the Switch Lite like I was. But nevertheless, I had a ton of fun exploring kind of every nook and cranny in this world. But when it comes to performance issues, there were definitely some fuzzy textures and some pop-ins, especially considering the field depth. But Gust recently released a patch which kind of helped fix a few of those problems. It didn't fix everything, but I think it is a big improvement. But when you're exploring around, there's so many different things that you can interact with in the environment, such as swimming. Like in the previous game, you can dive and swim underwater. But they also streamlined a lot of the other features that made exploring a lot easier, such as when you're gathering items, you don't have to kind of stand there and gather things one by one individually. You can kind of just zip through things without that kind of gathering motion if you hit it correctly. There are some delays, but it's definitely not as bad as the previous entries. And the other new feature that's important to highlight is you can pet the cats and dogs in the game, and there's many of them, especially around the towns. I do wish that they let you pet the goats though, because there are quite a number of goats throughout the Atelier games, and I felt like they were kind of neglecting the goats and not letting you pet them. And the other thing I wanted to note was that there is a little mini map you could refer to when exploring, but I did find it a little bit difficult to navigate using that sometimes, and I do wish that there was an easier way to access a larger map when you're just exploring around. You kind of have to go through these different menus, especially when you're in some of the more complex labyrinths with different level tiers. It's a little bit harder to navigate those. But overall, I think the third game really just enhanced the exploration and is easily the best we've seen in Atelier games so far. Now on to combat. With every entry in the Atelier franchise, I've noticed that Gust really likes to experiment with their combat systems, and I would say that they really streamlined things in the third game here. They sort of threw out all of the traditional turn-based mechanics that we've seen in some of the previous games and focused more on a streamlined approach when executing combo sequences with your party members. There's more emphasis on time cooldowns and kind of building up your AP in order to execute different combo attacks. It felt a lot more refined and very easy to execute. While I did enjoy the combat, I did find it a bit on the easier side. It kind of just fell into a routine of using the same sort of combo sequences and seeing the same actions play out, which got a bit on the boring side. I suppose this is probably why they introduced so many different characters to choose from to change things up if you wanted. So I kind of wish I did that a bit more than I did. And in terms of performance, everything went well, except there were a few different times where my character would kind of stop mid-motion and kind of ruin my combo sequences for that round, which is a tad annoying. So I don't know if this is a problem just with the Switch version or just me playing on handheld on the Switch Lite, but I just wanted to mention this, that it was a problem I encountered a couple times. Overall, I think the combat was a bit on the easier side, especially when compared to the first two Ryza games. However, there are still some kind of difficulty spikes where you have to go back and upgrade all your equipment in order to make progress in the story, which leads us to the Alchemy, which is a major component in the Atelier games. Because Ryza is an alchemist, she does gather all these different ingredients on her travels and uses them to make various items. So I'm generally not one that's that enthusiastic when it comes to the crafting mechanics you find in some of the RPG games nowadays. However, there's something about the Atelier series that I find oddly addicting. I just found it oddly satisfying, kind of unlocking all the various different tools and ingredients you can make in order to upgrade your equipment. It's just a very fun mechanic that you can pour hours into if you wish. And because alchemy is a very important component of the game, you can't really skip it if that's not really your thing. However, they do offer some streamlined options where if you have all the ingredients, they could just manually make those items for you. This kind of strips you in that you can't really customize some of those items and get all the potential upgrades that they could have. But overall, it's not totally crucial to really play around with the alchemy system if you don't want to. I find it very fun, but I know it's not for everyone. But it is very crucial to have the right equipment or items on hand for the combat sequences. So you really can't skimp out on upgrading your harvesting tools in order to find new and higher quality ingredients in order to build some of the more advanced armor and weapons, as well as some of the combat elemental items, which may be the thing that really helps you win a boss fight. I know the alchemy part could be a make it or break it part for a lot of the players, but I do really encourage you, even if you don't really like crafting systems, to give it a try. You might find it oddly addicting as well. So story-wise, you might be wondering, how does this third entry compare to the previous two entries? I'll admit it is on the weaker side, however, I did find it extremely enjoyable still. This series is heavily carried by the characters, and honestly, the plot isn't so much why people play these games. It's entirely, I would say, driven by how charming the characters are and how they interact in their new environments and with each other. I think out of all three games, the second entry is probably my favorite story out of the bunch, mostly because I felt like there was more of a sense of purpose of why these characters needed to kind of grow and mature more in order to sort of reach more of a kind of, I think, heartfelt storyline of trying to help a friend in need. But this is not to say the third entry has a bad story at all. I still found it very charming, and all the different references to the previous games and kind of how it all built upon each other was very satisfying. I just kind of wish there was more of a plot device that would elevate these games to be more of I guess, story-driven JRPGs rather than character-driven JRPGs. Now the next question is this a good entry point to start with? You may have guessed the answer to this already. However, I will say that the tutorial explaining how all the different mechanics works, from the combat to the alchemy, was really well done. I think it's the best the series has done so far, and it really guides new players on how things work. Without sort of ambiguous things you kind of have to figure out along the way. The third game also does a pretty good job at inserting different flashbacks and references to the previous games where they're not too confusing when maybe a character brings up something. But I would say that even with these flashbacks, it probably is still confusing for new players to fully understand why someone said something or was referencing XYZ. So overall, I think it would be a disservice to say that you can start from the third game. It's definitely doable. However, I feel like to get the most enjoyment out of this game, you do have to start from the first Ryza game. You would just be missing that core element that I think is what makes a lot of fans just completely adore this series. And I think, as I previously alluded to before, Atelier Ryza is more of a coming to age story. So her and her friends kind of grow alongside each other, and so you just be missing out on so many different interactions that the Atelier games are known for. There are a ton of cutscenes and interaction segments that are, I think, just the heart of the Atelier games. The first game can be a bit on the slower side, especially compared to other JRPGs out on the market. However, it's still very enjoyable, And the second game, even more so in how much they elevated all the different mechanics and elements in that particular entry. So it'd be a disservice, I think, to skip out on both of those and just go right into Ryza 3. There is an upcoming anime adaptation in the works, so we don't have to say goodbye to Ryza just yet. However, this is a bittersweet end to a trilogy of games that I've just come to adore with each and every sequence. So I'm really looking forward to what Gust has in the works in the future. We do have the Atelier Marie remake coming out this summer, but I'm really looking forward to see what new trilogy or characters Gust will bring in the future and what new magical journey they'll kind of bring us with. So as we say goodbye to the Ryza games for now, but I think Gust did accomplish what they set out to do in creating this nice, ambitious final entry that was a love letter to fans and a great farewell to this very beloved trilogy. So let me know what you think about Atelier Ryza 3 if you played it yet, or if you're looking into maybe starting the Atelier games with the Ryza trilogy. I'd love to know, and until my next video, bye guys.